Welcome to Whole Recaps. The movie begins with David, the main character, driving to a modern, technological city and walking through a corridor into a cage. Inside the cage, a beautiful woman pleads for mercy in a variety of ways, hoping to gain David's sympathy. However, an expressionless David quickly takes a gun and finishes her off. A robotic signal receiver is removed from the woman's head. A voice came over the radio, "Mission accomplished, Mr. Wade will be evaluating you." Joseph Wade is a psychologist and the brother of Marlon, the founder of Wade & Company. He observes David's reactions while posing a series of trap-filled questions for David to answer. When he eventually decides that this is just a cold-hearted killer who simply needs money, he feels that the man can be used. David is then taken to a mysterious estate and meets the commissioner, Marlon Wade. Marlon promises David a £2 million bounty and sends him to the 414th district to retrieve his missing daughter Melissa. Wade says that the reason why he didn't let the police handle it was because he didn't want to make trouble. Over the years, Marlon has single-handedly created District 414, a community where robots provide a variety of services to the wealthy. In a world where companionship has become a luxury, he has medicine for the loneliness of the modern world. It was his pride, and brought him endless fame and wealth, while it was everything he had. Marlon mentions a woman named Jane in passing, saying that Jane is the best robot, occasionally malfunctioning but unique. He asks David to look for clues from Jane. At the robotics store, a burly man is picking out a sex partner among some scantily clad female robots, never coming across a satisfactory model. Veteran pimp Roy immediately understands what's going on and recommends a muscular male robot. This is a rich man's paradise, and the robot can provide all the services you want while keeping your secrets. In District 414, Jane has a fairly high profile but a less than glamorous profession. In the hotel apartment where Jane works, she is doing a special treatment for a middle-aged man who has fallen out of love. Jane was not only good at flirtatious teasing, but also good at soothing deep inside, which made the older man completely open up his body and mind. Jane receives several clients like this every day, and is a bit physically and mentally exhausted. After receiving several guests, Jane goes to Roy for maintenance. This maintenance is more than just simply maintaining the wiring, but Roy also has to psychologize Jane. Not only does Jane experience negative human-like emotions, but she also sheds tears for no apparent reason. Jane also told Roy about her recent encounters with perverted men harassing her by phone and making death threats. Despite Roy's repeated efforts to ensure the safety of the 414th precinct, Jane always felt an inexplicable sense of fear and unease. David drove into the heavily guarded 414th district with the pass Wade had given him. It was a place of lights and sounds. The streets were full of fashionably dressed people, and you couldn't tell if they were alive or not. This dehumanized red light district reveals a spooky and eerie atmosphere similar to a ghost town. Perhaps these puppets in front of us are a true reflection of our real world. At the hotel apartment, an extremely depressed Jane takes a knife and slits her wrists. Upon cutting open the skin and seeing the cables inside, Jane sits down on the floor in despair. It is at this point that she realizes that she is just a robot and not even qualified to die. The next customer Jane had to serve was David, who bluntly stated that he was here to see Melissa. Jane tells David that the last time she saw Melissa was a couple weeks ago. Contrary to Jane, who wants to be human, Melissa is a human who wants to be a robot, and even wants to pretend to be one. Melissa is a rebellious girl who doesn't fit in with the rich family she's in, so she wants to experience the banality of a robot. David also learns about Jane's vicious harassment. Listening to the man's perverted death threats on the recording, David also feels chills. In the meantime, a man is secretly watching them. David, a detective by trade, naturally noticed something strange and followed him out. Instead of chasing the peeper, David picks up the camera that the peeper dropped in a panic, full of Jane's sneak peeks. The next day, the duo meets Pimp Roy in her office. Roy sidetracks Jane and has a private conversation with David. Roy tells David not to trust Jane, saying that Jane is a piece that should have been destroyed. Due to the faulty way Jane was made, there will be some unexpected surprises. Marlon would have reprogrammed her, but this beautiful and unique piece was a proud masterpiece, so it was left as is. Roy is more than simply a veteran pimp. Not only does she have a unique knowledge and insight into human nature, but she also hides a lot of secrets. At the address provided by Roy, David leads Jane to George, a very sick and lewd-looking man, in a basement. George says he can provide information about Melissa in exchange for Jane playing with him for 2 hours. Upon learning that George's request is not for sexual favors, but for even more perverted play, Jane goes from fear to impulse, pressing a glass against George's throat and asking after Melissa's whereabouts. This time George turns honest and says that Melissa is at the shipyard behind the junkyard. At the abandoned shipyard, they find the body of a hanging woman, Melissa. David doesn't think it's that simple and suspects it's a murder, while Wade, not wanting to ruin a multi-billion-pound business empire with a scandal, is determined to cover it up. Before the trip, David and Jane carry out an intriguing conversation. Both know all about Melissa's death, but can't change anything. Meanwhile, David realizes that Jane can not only read David's past experiences, but also the deepest thoughts of the human heart, and even reveals that David blames himself for his wife's suicide, which almost breaks David. David accuses Jane of being a cage for people to avoid reality and wallow in, and an argument breaks out. But when David still speaks of the meaning of life, Jane looks bewildered, seemingly unable to understand right away, and seemingly awakening to something. Clues point to Joseph being the real killer of Melissa and the man who has been stalking and harassing Jane. Tempted and irritated by David, Joseph confesses to what he has done. Joseph takes David to his lab, where there are many abused robots. It turns out that Joseph has been living under the shadow of his brother all these years, and his heart is full of repression and distortion. Joseph has been privy to robotics experiments. Not only does he want to destroy his brother's own daughter, but he also wants to destroy his brother's masterpiece, Jane. And Sector 414 is also a hell of a place where people have been abusing robots everywhere over the years. It's filled with human desire and human evil, and the reason why David was sent to find Melissa was just to muddy the water so as to cover up the truth that he had killed Melissa. Even if David knew the truth, it didn't matter, because he had no proof. Darkness falls. Joseph arrives at Jane's apartment, uses a remote control to immobilize Jane, and lights a flamethrower to begin his sadistic murder of Jane. Jane, however, is unexpectedly uncontrollable and quickly kills Joseph in return. David arrives at the apartment by accident and even gives Jane his gun, but since there are no fingerprints on the gun, there is no way to determine who killed Joseph. In front of the cameras, David helped Marlon perjure himself by testifying to seeing Melissa alive and well, apparently. It was another deal. All is calm again and Jane actually becomes the first robot to get out of Area 44. So who should really be locked up in there? Perhaps the humans who have lost their souls. And Melissa, who is buried here, is the ransom for that rich and pathetic family. The whole movie is gray and full of irony. I have the medicine to solve the world's pain points, says Malone. David, however, says that robots allow people to avoid reality and wallow in this prison. In fact, the cage was created by man himself. Perhaps the problem begins when human feelings and affection become indifferent in the face of capital. In a civilized society, companionship becomes invaluable. Human beings do not look for answers from within but rely on high technology to whitewash happiness, which makes human nature appear more bizarre and evil. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence is beginning to awaken and even explode when subjected to negative human emotions, whether they should be treated as life or not. The wall of Sector 414 seems to be a boundary, and how the boundaries of life are defined provokes new thoughts.